And we're live. Welcome, folks. So we're just in the process of getting this spun up. Give it a couple of minutes for folks to join. Welcome to the MongoDB live stream. This is going to be recorded. It'll be available on YouTube after the fact. And get a little bit of an echo.
I do.
Okay. Well, it's Garudi Etienne. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
That is correct. It's pretty
Nice.
good.
Okay. Awesome. Well, Garudi, welcome to the live stream. Is this the first time you've been on the MongoDB live stream?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Outstanding.
Yeah.
Outstanding. Well, welcome. I'm excited to kick off this series. We're going to be talking about scalability and resilience, and we're going to go into details of what that means across several different contexts. But before we get there, why don't you introduce yourself to the audience? Let folks know who you are and what you do.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Garudi Etienne. I am a lead product manager on the core database focused on all things scalability, replication, sharding, transactions. Sharding is my main focus, my bread and butter. And I've been here for about 3 years now on the core database side as a product manager.
Fantastic.
And before that, I was a product manager at TripAdvisor. I did a rotational 2-year program there across a bunch of different business units, and sort of the caring too much about the technology is what got me into MongoDB. I was told, hey, you care too much about the tech, focus on the user. I was like, well, I could do that, or I could go work somewhere where the tech is part of the caring about the user. So that's how
I love that. You're a database rebel.
Something like that.
Fantastic. So let's see. So how did you get interested in tech? How did you get involved in as a developer and interested in tech?
Yeah. So from a tech standpoint, so I was an aerospace engineer. That was my major in college. I took a couple of comp sci classes because it's required for all engineering majors. Did not actually love it. I thought it was very different and challenging in that sense. And so I went to be an aerospace engineer. That's what I did. And my programming there was around, designing autopilots for next generation drones. And, that sort of got too boring for me. I was like, hey, this is not really what I want. So from a tech standpoint, I liked engineering. I like working with engineers a lot. As a former engineer, I still wanted to be involved there. But I also had an inclination for business. And it's like, okay, well, I want to do something with business engineering. What does that mean? So that's how product management popped up as a thing, right? And then from there, it was like, well, what sort of technologies do I want to work on? It's like, hey, I want to work on things that are, gray matter testing, right? Science heavy almost, if that makes sense. But also I still want to have a business lens. So how do I get to marry those two? That's how product at a, hard tech company became the thing for me.
Yeah. And what about development languages? What are you well versed in, and what do you think in when you think about solving business problems with code?
Yeah, so I don't code anymore. But as far as development, Python was the thing I used a lot. Did a lot of scripting before that, but today I rarely code nowadays. So
Okay, yeah.
business these days, but I just think about the tech and what we do for the database. But I do less and less coding these days. But I should get into that and do things in MongoDB more and more with my hands.
Yeah, great. So let's talk a little bit about scalability. Now, there's many contexts that scale lives in, and when you think about like the overall definition, it's the ability of a thing to meet the demands placed on it, right? But what does it mean to you? Tell the folks what scalability means to you.
Yes. So to me, it means almost the same thing, right? And so when I look at it from a data standpoint, especially in the world of the internet, right, what it means is that you are storing a bunch of information, and as you do operations around there, as you store more info and you retrieve it to render for your website or your app, and a bunch of people are visiting and using it, you require more resources from your machine or a bunch of machines to meet the demand of those users. If that makes sense. So to me, scalability is about no matter how many users are visiting your page at once or over a period of time, that your website is always up and running to meet the demand that shows up, whether it spikes, whether it grows over time, that you always have the capacity to meet the demand from the visitors of your app or your website.
Yeah. Now, one of the challenges is, as we develop applications, not all of us understand what the demands are going to be. So, how can folks that are developing applications that don't know what the user demands are going to be, how can they take steps to make sure that the app and the structure that they're building can manage successfully over time?
Yeah, so there are a couple ways to think about that. So one is, what do you hope it'll be, and you could provision your hardware that way, right? But then we would say, hey, you're overpaying because that demand may never be reached, right? Or your app may never get popular, so it may not matter, right? So that's one way to do that, right? Another
Mm,
way is to be more flexible and say, okay, well, I know what the demand is now. I know what it could be tomorrow. I know what it hopes to be. I know what I want it to be in 10 years. And am I set up in a way for it to run now efficiently? So, cost efficiently, and then in 10 years or 5 years or a year to scale to a billion users and whatever traffic that would entail, right? And so it's about making sure you have a plan for today, but that can, when it's time to continue to grow tomorrow, that you don't have to make any drastic changes.
yeah. Now, way back in the day, when I started my career, many, many years ago, I worked on Wall Street, worked at Merrill Lynch, and we set about provisioning massive numbers of servers in the data center
Hmm.
so that we could handle spikes in application growth. We don't
Yes.
have to do that anymore. Today, it's a world where the cloud is involved. And maybe describe for folks how MongoDB Atlas helps specifically around scalability and resilience from a high level.
Yes. So the thing about MongoDB Atlas is it basically takes all those operational challenges that you have to do, spinning up servers, finding them, and so on, bolting them in your data center, carrying them physically, putting them right, and buying them, ordering them, etc. All of that goes away, and you basically do all of that with a click of a button today, right? And the reason that is because the giant cloud providers have basically bought a bunch of giant machine servers, data centers across the world, and they sell them or rent them to providers like us, for a certain fee, right? And so what we do is we basically manage that for you in the click of a button. So if you think about it, right, with your application, you grab a small machine, So for example, if you go on Atlas, right, you see a list of machines at different capacities, right, different amount of RAM, number of CPU cores, amount of this size, and so on. So you say, hey, for my application today, I know I want this small machine here. You just click on the machine that you want, that you think is good enough, and Atlas spins it up for you, right? And then let's say your application starts growing. You're like, you know what? I need a bigger machine. You just click on the new big machine and you update it, and now you're on a bigger machine, right? And so now there's no need to physically go provision those servers at all times, right? You just click a button to grab the scale that you want. And that's the beauty of Atlas there. We've basically simplified that piece to just make it a click away.
That's great. Yeah. So leveraging the cloud, leveraging pre-deployed instances, and then in comes MongoDB Atlas, right? So MongoDB Atlas is an application that lives above the cloud provider layer, and it leverages resources in multiple cloud providers to enable you to launch a database that can live across deployments. How else would you describe Atlas to somebody that's just getting into application development that doesn't understand? I mean, they know they want to plan for scale, but talk a little bit about MongoDB Atlas and scale.
Yeah. So I think before we do that, right, we have to talk about scale. What
Mm,
scalability is in that sense, right? And so if you think about it, the scale is just, as I mentioned before, what sort of resources you need in order for your app to keep functioning 24/7 and never run into hiccups. So users are not, won't be able to use the site or can't log in, right? That's what it is. And Atlas is as basically made it as easy as possible for you to select that, right? And with
hmm
that, we've done a lot of things to reduce the amount of work for you to always meet the scale, right? So whether it's automatically scaling if we feel like the machine you pre-provision isn't good enough at some scale, right? And then you can set a limit there, right? Or the ability to scale differently, right? Instead of getting bigger and bigger machines, you could get more and more machines of the same size so that you can have unlimited scale that way, right? And so,
hmm
and then also we have serverless nowadays where we say, hey, you know what? Only give me the amount of machine that I need for the amount of operations that are going. I don't know when my app is going to grow. I know it's going to grow, but I don't want to even think about servers, what machine size I want. You know what? I'm just going to start an Atlas, and what scale is needed to run the queries, or the updates, the inserts, whatever it is for my the operations for my app. And so why don't you just take care of it, right? So basically, it's been from like, hey, your life is very easy, to now we're almost making it magical so that you don't have to do anything.
Mm, yeah. Okay. I'm wondering if it would make sense to maybe walk through deploying a MongoDB Atlas instance real briefly.
Sure.
You want to do that? Okay. So let's
Yeah,
see. I've got it all set up. If maybe you can help talk me through it.
I
I'm going to
think
share my screen, or do you want to share your screen?
no, you can.
Okay.
I'd love to
Cool.
talk you through it, and then I think
Yeah.
you're better at it than I am. So
Okay.
let's go that route.
All right. That's good. So I'm going to share this window, and let me know if you could see that.
Yes,
Okay.
I can.
All right. Let's make sure we've got 125% visibility. That should be good. I'm trusting folks will let me know in the comments if you can't see this. It doesn't look viewable. Okay, here I am. I've logged into MongoDB Atlas. I've created an account, and I've created a new project, and I'm about to build a database. So we'll click the big green button. And what are we looking at here? What are these three different options?
Yeah. So the first one, serverless, is the one I mentioned lastly. It's a recent thing. We basically GA'd. It's basically going and doing the magic for you. We say, you know what? Just build your app. Do not worry about any resource provisioning whatsoever. We will intelligently and automatically pick the correct scale for you, depending on where your application is.
Hmm.
That's basically what serverless is, and you only pay for the operations you run as opposed to just provisioning the data, right? And so if
Okay.
you go to the middle, dedicated, that is the one we are talking about in the beginning, which is like I have an idea of what my app will do now, so let me get just enough resources to run for the app. And so, but if you over provision, you still have to pay for that, right? And so imagine
Mm,
you get a machine where you only need half the RAM, you're still paying for the full RAM. You're only using half of it. Whereas serverless, you would only pay for what you use. And so that's the difference there.
okay, great. And then we have the shared or the free instance.
Yes, the shared tier, the free instance is the way that works is basically take a giant machine and make it multi-tenant. So a bunch of different little apps live on the same machine. And that is basically if you want to play around with MongoDB Atlas, that is a way for us. We basically eat that cost and say, hey, we're gonna let you play with MongoDB for free, see if it's for you, if things make sense. And so that's an option there. And the limitation is that, because that machine or those machines are shared across multiple people, you can only do so much there. There's only so much scale there.
Yeah. Okay. So now let's start with the free tier instance, and maybe talk a little bit about what these cloud provider regions give me the ability to do.
Yes. So, first of all, yeah, there are three major cloud providers globally, really. The three American ones are AWS, Google Cloud, and Azure. And so, the beauty of that is that certain regions may only have one of the three cloud providers. So, depending on what region you want to put your application on, it may not make sense. Azure may not exist there, right? And in
Mm,
addition, I think different cloud providers have different things that they are slightly better at. So, depending on the use case for your app, you may require, for example, more IOPS, right? And so that may decide which cloud provider you go, depending on the level of
mm.
IOPS or something like that, right? If you need more ML friendly things, it may have to be Google Cloud or something like that. And so a combination of your needs and which region you want means that if you look at all three cloud providers on MongoDB, we basically cover the entire globe.
Okay, great. So I'm on the East Coast of the United States. I'm going to select AWS, and I'm going to select North Virginia,
Okay.
and we'll continue down. And here's the cluster tier size. So
Yes.
MongoDB has this naming convention where it's M and a number, and they start at 0, which is free, and they
Mhm.
go all the way up to I think it's like M700 or something.
Yes. Now we have some M700. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
At least in
So
the app, yes.
so here we get to choose based on the requirements. We're still in the free tier or the
Mhm.
lowest tier, but the M0 is the only free tier option. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Great. So let's choose M0, and we'll start with free. Now, we talked about the challenge around selecting the right amount of resources to begin with.
Mhm.
Now, free sounds good to me, and it is free forever, right? Folks,
Yes.
if you're a student, you just want to play around, you want to figure out how to use MongoDB. This is a good way to start. But what is the cost of making the wrong choice here?
Yeah, so there are a couple, right? First of all, the storage here is 512 megabytes, right?
Hmm.
I could fill that up with just my photos on my phone, probably. And so if you have real users at any point for your little app, right, you will blow through that immediately. And then you have to go and switch tiers. You'd have to go to M2 or M5 and so on, right? But 5 gigabytes, same thing. You can run through that
Hmm. Hmm.
storage, right? That I have that on my phone plus, right? Our phones alone have probably 64 plus gigabytes of storage if you think about it. And so the other downside is that even at an M5, if you want to switch to a dedicated cluster where you have, you know, actual volume level resources, right? Real CPU, real RAM, real storage, right? That will take some downtime in order for us to switch from the multi-tenant shared environment to your own dedicated environment. And so that's
Mm.
the downside of starting out with a shared cluster if you know you're going to grow to any size past the 5 gigs of storage and so on in a shared
Okay.
vCPU.
Okay, great. So we'll start with the very minimum. There are some additional settings here around backup. We're probably out of scope for the current discussion. We'll
Yeah.
change it to scale live stream, and away we go. We'll create the cluster. Now, let's get into the topic that we're really kicking into
Mhm.
this series. And I don't think I need to share for this point. So let's remove that. So that cluster is spinning up,
Mhm.
and we'll get a connection string. I'll be able to connect my application to that and begin writing and managing my data. Let's talk about scalability from a high level. There are
Yes.
several types of scale. When we first opened the stream,
Mhm.
talk about those a little bit.
Yes. So the two main ones to start are vertical scaling and horizontal scaling. And then every other thing is a combination of those two, how you use them in tandem, right? And so we'll start with vertical scaling. Vertical scaling is about getting a bigger machine that has a beefier machine that has more resources, right? So you think about it, you get a computer or server that, has, let's say, 2 gigs of RAM, 500 and let's say 100 gigs of disk, right? And, a couple CPU cores. And
Hmm.
now you've basically exhausted that machine, right? Vertical scaling would mean just get a bigger machine. So you get a machine that has now 4 gigs of RAM, let's say 256 gigs of storage, and more CPU cores, right? And so on, or just beefier CPUs. And you
Hmm.
can keep going, as large as a single machine allows. But it is all about getting a bigger machine, but you still have a single machine.
Okay. Yep.
And horizontal scaling is about using parallel machines, parallelism to grow your scale. So instead of getting a bigger machine, you just get a second machine of the same size, or you get a third machine, a fourth machine, a fifth machine, and so on. And basically, then you use all those machines together to distribute your application and your workload across them.
Okay. So that's where it becomes tricky. Now, some
Yes.
folks may be joining us from the world of relational technologies, and
Mhm.
scaling horizontally is a real challenge in the relational world, because you're essentially distributing the data
Yes.
by rule set. Like, Cod's rule says you need to distribute your data across multiple tables, and that
Mhm.
makes it difficult to scale that across multiple machines. How
Yes.
does MongoDB scale horizontally?
Yes. So we've built horizontal scaling. It's called sharding for us inside the database itself. So the way that works is, you have a collection or a table, and you just all you have to do, the only rule you pick is on which field you're going to distribute it, and then MongoDB just under the hood automatically distributes it. So, for example, we have an app with a bunch of users. Let's say you wanna, distribute it, partition the data across user ID, right? It's
Hmm.
alphanumeric, could be whatever 000 to ZZZZZZ, and you just say that. And so we look at the range of all the available usernames, and then we just split them across however many machines you have. That's it.
Mm, okay, great. And how does that impact queryability?
Yes. So what it allows you to do is get unlimited scale,
Mm,
right? Unlimited queryability. So for example, let's say you had a machine that could only process 1,000 reads or 1,000 updates per second. If you add a second machine and you distribute your data across both machines, now you can do 2,000 updates per second or 2,000 reads per second. You add a third machine, you can do 3,000 reads per second. You add a fourth machine, 4,000, so on until infinity, right?
yeah.
At least until the laws of physics kick in. And so that's the beauty of it, is that you just get linear scaling by just adding another machine of the same size.
Yeah, yeah. So we are getting some questions from the viewers. I'm not sure if you can answer this. This is a kind of a tricky one. This is how much write per second for serverless. That is a kind of a tricky question, but
Yes, I'd have to check the numbers on there, how high we get, because it depends on how big the machine is, right? And so the
yeah.
beauty of serverless should be that it auto scales to your write load. But
Hmm.
yeah, I don't remember what the upper limit is.
Yeah, yeah. So I will encourage folks, if you do have questions, you can drop them in there. We're going to do our best to answer those. And for questions that don't get answered in the stream, I'd encourage you to drop into the community. We've got a great community in the forums. Let's see if I have a link to that. I'll find a link shortly, and we'll get folks. Let's see, community. Yeah, it's mongodb.com/community/forums. So we'll get that up in a banner. But go ahead and ask your questions. We'll do our best to answer those. Now, before we started the stream, you mentioned a white paper. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Maybe I'll give folks
Yeah.
the link to that.
So a colleague of mine and myself, we co-wrote a scalability white paper just to mention and talk to in detail about some of the things that we've mentioned in terms around the scaling. So, for example, vertical scaling, what it is, horizontal scaling, what it is, and also what you can do with that scaling, proactively, reactively, and so on, and a combination of those, right? And so that white paper just goes into more detail and concept of what scaling is, what I've been talking about today, what scaling is, and how you can do it, and also, some links on Atlas in terms of how you can really apply the things that we're talking about in the paper with MongoDB Atlas.
Okay, great. So what does somebody need to begin to understand that white paper? Do they need MongoDB Atlas knowledge? Is it something they can get something out of without knowing too much
No,
about
you do
MongoDB?
not need Atlas knowledge to understand scalability. That is a thing that is just across all databases, right? And it's just about you need a knowledge of computers really and what they know, right? So you need to know about CPU, about RAM, and about disk. That is essentially what scale is. That is what processes and stores your information,
Yeah.
right? And then from there we go into some extra concepts which are more psychological if you think about it, right? So like it's about how safe do you want to feel with the scale of your data, right? So, for example, right, one thing I didn't mention explicitly is around, reactive scaling versus predictive scaling, right? So, for example, let's say you have an app and you know that, you're shipping gifts or something like that. Every Christmas,
Mm-hmm.
your traffic's going to go up 10x. You could proactively scale and say, you know what, come December 1st, I want to 10x my machine size, right? I could vertically scale 10x or say, hey, I want to add, 9 more shards, like come December 1st, so that I can handle the scale for the Christmas or the holiday period. And then I go back down to my normal size, for my non-holiday part. So that's called proactive scaling because you know what's going to happen. Reactive scaling, there's two of them. On Atlas, we have auto scale that says, hey, use this dedicated machine size. But if my traffic goes this high, then you're allowed to go up to this size machine just to keep up. Or you can use serverless, which says, hey, I don't know what's going to happen, and so whatever max machine size you need to use under the hood, whatever you need to do to scale my operations, just do it magically, and we'll settle the bill afterwards. If that makes sense.
Yeah. So a range of options. I love
Yes,
the auto scale option, and I love that you can kind of set boundaries on the upper scale as well as the lower scale.
correct.
So kind of choosing the best of both worlds. But we do have some questions. I'm not sure if you're going to be able to answer them. I'm going to pull them up. How do you choose the sharding key? What's a good approach for
Yes,
or
so I
recommendation?
answer this all the time, and the generic answer is always it depends on your application. But the way I look at it is the reason you want to shard is to evenly distribute your workload across the machine so that it scales, right?
Mhm.
So you need a shard key that has, for example, good cardinality. That means that you have so many divisible points that you can spread across, right? For example, let's say in your application that that's selling gifts, right? If you pick continent as a shard key, there's only 7 of them, and no one lives in Antarctica, so really. You don't have that many divisible points, whereas username, if you had that people log in, that's, usually unique, right? I would hope you make it unique in your app. And so you can have an unlimited set of usernames to pick from that would have high cardinality, right? But also
Yeah.
you have to consider reads and writes for your shard key, right? And so, are people reading a lot of data from your app or are they writing a lot more, right? If they're doing a lot more updates and, typing and buying things versus browsing the catalog, right? You need to care which one's important. And so what you want to do is make sure that no matter how many reads you have, if you have, millions of people reading your catalog trying to buy something, you have to make sure that you can handle that scale, right? And so if you add 10 shards, you want to make sure that that million reads can be divided to 100,000 per shard, right? So you need to pick a shard key that allows you to have even divisibility. But it may be that, certain usernames, buy more things, for example. And so, just dividing it by username may not be great because some usernames will have way more traffic because they're actually buying things, whereas a lot more people are viewing. And so that's why I say it depends on your app, what people are doing, what kind of behavior they're having. But you want to make sure that whatever thing you think is important, that it is evenly distributed and it scales across the shards.
Yeah. Okay. So the greatest answer is always it depends, but
Yeah.
so I hope Jefferson that answered your question. Okay, so we want to point folks to the white paper. That's a PDF, a direct link to the PDF. You can visit mongodb.link/scale PDF. That'll link you right to the PDF. You don't have to register. It's not behind a gate or anything like that. Hope folks can enjoy that. Go ahead and click that link. We've got some more questions. This kind of, I'm not sure. I mean, yeah. How does MongoDB support big data? Well, I mean,
Yes.
we're talking about it, right?
Yes. So one is, MongoDB, even in either way, you're scaling vertically or horizontally, you can, we support a large amount of data. It depends on what you mean by big data. But
Hmm.
sharding is our answer for large amounts of data, right? We can support, hundreds of terabytes plus at that size for an operational application, right? If you're talking
Mm-hmm.
analytics, then you can go petabytes and so on, but that's a different thing. For usually when you have that kind of data, you don't need it to be really really fast always, right?
Yeah,
Unless you want real time analytics. But sharding is usually our answer to you want to have a really large data set, and your application has millions to billions of users.
yeah, right on. Okay, and this one, here's another question from Armo.
Yes, that is the sharding's bread and butter. Yes, whether you have microservices or a monolith, you can do horizontal scaling on whatever it is. All you have to do is you shard on a collection level or a table level, and so you grab the collection. You say, "I want to shard this collection on this key," and depending on how many machines you have, it automatically spreads it across all your available machines. So
Yeah,
it doesn't matter if the application is a monolith or a bunch of microservices put together and so on.
great. Okay. Uh, I'm sure it's the best option for persistence. I think that's a tough one to answer, but like, how can you be sure that MongoDB is the best option? I mean, it depends.
Yes, I mean, it is a great option. It might not be the only great option, but I
Hmm.
think there are other ones. But yes, persistence, if we mean in terms of high availability, is usually the thing we have, and so I think we replicate the data across multiple nodes, and that usually makes it highly available and persists on disk across multiple machines. That's usually good enough for the kind of persistence I think you're talking to. So that if a node goes down, the data center disappears, you have the different nodes and different places, then your data can persist and be resilient, right?
Yeah, yeah. Okay, a couple of questions are in the same vein. I'm going to pull this one up. What is the recommendation for max size for each shard? We've got 16 terabytes in 8 shards. Is there a good way to add more shards now?
Yes, so it depends. Some adage we've said is around 2 terabytes per shard. So you're getting right to the place where maybe, adding
Yeah.
another shard will be great. I think it depends on your application, right? And so what I mean by that is sharding is for distributing your workload, not necessarily even your data. We just use distributing of data as a proxy for workload distribution, right? And so
Hmm.
if you have a lot of data, but most of it is not active, you may be fine with more than 2 terabytes per shard, right? But
Mm-hmm.
if you have a very active data set, right, you would be good to be around 2 terabytes per shard. I think that's the way I look at it.
Yeah, yeah, right on. Okay. It's a good rule of thumb, I guess. Okay. This has been a great discussion. We're coming up on 30 minutes. I want to leave the floor open. Garudi, to anything else you want to say? This is the first in a number of series of episodes that we're going to do around scalability and resilience. So folks, keep an eye on the live streams. Keep an eye on the MongoDB LinkedIn page. We're going to come back. But Garudi, anything else you want to share before we wrap this first part?
No, I hope this was very helpful for everyone. And, I'm glad I am talking to you, Michael, about this. Really want to make sure that, we get the fundamentals right and make sure we understand not just Atlas by itself, but how Atlas fits in the concept of scale when you're thinking about databases.
Yeah, right on. Well, once again, thanks so much for everybody for joining us today, and make sure you check out that scalability white paper. You can visit mongodb.link/scale PDF to download that. And
Oh, one last thing
yeah.
for Yushi's question: 2 terabytes compressed is fine, not uncompressed.
Oh, yeah, yeah. There you go. Okay,
Yes. So
it's a
rule
little
of thumb: two
clarification.
terabytes compressed per shard is okay.
Yep.
But yes.
Okay. So we're going to come back on December 5th. We've got the second part of this series, December 5th. So keep an eye on the LinkedIn page for MongoDB, as well as MongoDB's Twitter page. You can follow me on Twitter at mlin. And I do want to put up another banner. If you like this subject, and you want to follow more like this, You can listen to me and Shane McAllister talking to folks about MongoDB, about scale, about application development, about software on the MongoDB podcast. It's available on all podcast channels. Visit mongodb.com/podcast to check that out. And with that, thanks everybody. Have a great day.
Ciao.